Hi, my name's Dada, and I would like to potentially examine the impact of negative Australian media representation of Muslims on the self-esteem of second-generation Muslim Australians. I would like to start with a quote from a study about negative representation of Native Americans. For some social identity groups, such as white middle-class individuals, the media provides an abundance of positive, varied representations, whereas for others, such as working-class and racial ethnic minority individuals, it provides a limited number of predominantly negative and narrow representations. Linda Ann, in her book called Race and Gender in Electronic Media Content, Context, Culture, suggests the majority of research focusing on ethnic minority depictions in the media has focused on outcomes such as stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination among white audiences. The research has not focused on how people from ethnic minority groups are affected by exposure to media messages about their group. Furthermore, very few studies have taken a quantitative approach to addressing this relationship. In what ways could negative media representations impact ethnic minorities, people of color, and Indigenous people? Well, the literature suggests that reduced strength of identity with the country they live in, reduced trust in the government, reduced perception of potential, depressed academic future possibilities, increased feeling of anger, and what's most relevant to what we're talking about today is lower self-esteem. Let's take a deeper look at the literature in regards to representation and self-esteem. Researchers found that increasing exposure to entertainment television was correlated with lower self-esteem among Black American audiences. A study using survey methodology to assess the effects of mainstream media on ethnic minorities, in specific looking at Indian Americans, found that mainstream media is associated with decreased self-esteem. And a study testing how homogeneous media portrayals of Native Americans impacted their self-esteem found that seeing Native American stereotypical characterization in print form had a negative effect on self-esteem and beliefs about community efficacy. This could be explained by the social identity threat theory. This theory stems from the social identity theory, which proposes that the groups people belong to, such as class, football team, and culture, for example, played a big role in their pride and sense of belonging, as well as many other factors that shape who they are. So the social identity threat theory indicates that marginalized group members may experience negative emotions such as vicarious shame when negative stereotypes about their group are confirmed in either real-world or mediated contexts. So this could include media representation. Previous research has looked at the impact of negative representation on other cultures and ethnicities. So why is it important to study Muslims in Australia in specific? Well, different cultures react differently psychologically. We can't rely on research that focuses on one culture, group, or ethnicity and generalize it to others, as the research may reflect only that specific culture's reactions. It's important to examine different cultures and demographics separately in order to gain a deeper understanding. Furthermore, around 604,000 Australians, or around 2.6% of the population, identify as Muslims. So why look at second-generation Muslims in specific? Well, in Joseph Henrich's book, The Weirdest People in the World, How the West Became Psychologically Peculiar and Particularly Prosperous, he stresses that one concern of the patterns that may be seen when comparing different cultures and populations is that the results are a reflection of individuals reacting to the costs and benefits of the institutions of the world they live in, rather than their cultural identity. So he suggests that when examining second-generation immigrants who live in the same town and cities but differ in cultural identity, a deeper understanding of the psychological impact of the variables can be achieved. Furthermore, a study done on 204 first and second generation Muslims found clear differences between first and second generation immigrant groups, revealing that perceived discrimination represents an obstacle to integration processes more for second generation immigrants than for first generations. So, significantly higher impact of perceived discrimination on second generation Italian Muslim psychological well-being was seen in comparison to that of first generation Italian Muslims. How prevalent is negative representation of Muslims in Australian media? Muslims have been represented in the Australian media as the enemy within and othered continually. Studies found that words such as Muslim, illegal immigrant, terrorists, and enemy were all used interchangeable within the Australian media, and a lot of negative and manipulative tactics were used to sway public opinion against asylum seeker children who came from Muslim backgrounds. Furthermore, a study focused on 5 newspapers, so the Australian, the Daily Telegraph, the Herald Sun, the Courier Mail, and the Advertiser in 2019. In these 5 newspapers, almost 3,000 articles were found that refer to Islam or Muslim alongside words like violence, extremism, terrorism, or radical. So that was over 8 articles a day in these newspapers with negative representations of Muslims, and 152 front pages over the year 2019 that featured Islam in some negative capacity were found. The literature so far on the effects of negative representation of Muslims in the media found that the media's stereotypes can further marginalize vulnerable Muslim youth, and that can make them susceptible to radicalization. Furthermore, a longitudinal study done on 7 second-generation Arab Muslim boys in southwestern Sydney found that their formation as a gang could be attributed to their marginalization by mainstream society. After a couple of years, they had all become educated and employed Australian citizens, but a couple of them still recalled the anger and shame they felt from the media's representation of ethnic groups as criminals. A study done on 152 Muslim American students found that negative media portrayal can have stronger negative effects on national identifications of Muslim Americans than personal experiences of discriminations. And an opinion survey among Australian Muslims in 2017 revealed that Australian Muslims are critical of news coverage on Australia. Furthermore, they have fears regarding the divisive nature of Australian media in the portrayal of Muslims. There were some limitations in the previous studies though, such as the use of student samples, which limits the generalizability of the result. Also the homogenization of Muslims, so the majority of Muslim samples identified as Arab, Middle Eastern or Sunni. Also in interview and focus-based studies, some participants, such as women, were not willing to speak. There is a gap in the research as it appears that no research has addressed what effect the negative representation of Muslims in the Australian media has on second-generation Muslim Australian self-esteem so far. The question I propose is, does negative representation on Australian media have an impact on second-generation Muslim Australian self-esteem? Why is this important for psychology? Well, in order to successfully help clients from ethnic minorities or people of color, psychologists should be aware of the unique difficulties groups face that may impact their psychological well-being. I have anticipated difficulties such as having a representative sample and not homogenizing Muslim identities. It's hard to measure the impact of media in natural settings as well, and the problem of respondent bias.